Greetings and salutations, gentle viewers. I apologize for the zombie lighting, but this is what I look like under electric light. And I need to do this review right now because I'm about to DNF this book at page 56. Though probably, honestly, 50 because I've been skim reading it so much. I need to stop reading this and never do this again. And I need to review it instantly because I want to have forgotten that this book exists in a day or two. So it was part of a large book haul and I bought it for its apparent science fiction cred. Published in 1958. It's called 43,000 Years Later. It's got a really cool science fiction-y cover. It's a cute old panther book, which is usually a really good sign, and it's a first English edition. I think the original was New American Library of World Literature from 1958, and this was printed in England in 1959, so it was pretty early on. I'd never heard of it. I'd never heard of the author, Horace Coon, and for the book collector, you'll notice that there is a sticker on the cover. I'm sure you can't read that. Which normally I try and get off, but I found it very entertaining. It says Snooper's Paradise, and at first I thought that was actually from Surfers Paradise just up the road, and it was someone had named their bookshop a funny name, but no. It's actually from Brighton in England, and the price is given as 50p in pounds. That's so cute. Store number 11059. Horace Coon, never heard of him. And the reason for that, when I went online and started looking it up, is that Horace Coon, while he was, by the sound of it, a professional American author, he didn't write science fiction. Oh yes. Born 1897, died 1961, a US author, and he mostly wrote non-fiction on cultural and political business issues. This is his only science fiction that I could tell. Most of his books have got names like Hobbies for Pleasure and Profit, Speak Better, Write Better English, and How to Spell and Increase Your Word Power. And Horace should have stuck to those because OMG can he not do science fiction at all. Now for those of you who like niche books and niche authors, there are 13 ratings for this on Goodreads and only 4 of them have bothered to review them. They have reviewed them anything from 1 star to 4 stars, with the majority in at 3 because I think they were being generous. So the hypothesis here, there were 3 explorers from another planet in Annuar Domini 45,000, 2 men and 1 woman. They'd come to Earth to discover why it had blown itself up. And that sounded very science fiction to me. It isn't. It really, really isn't. So what you've got is a bit of a preview by Scribe, who is the scribe to the intergalactic whatever it is. And because this preliminary reconnaissance has ended up with so much interest in the galactic whatever, instead of waiting for the full report by the 3 explorers, scientists and archaeologists, they're putting out this intermediary for the common man type report. So it sounds really, really science fiction, but from chapter 1 it isn't. This is a very thinly described satire of politics and human race. And it is poorly done. So these 3 explorers are meant to be aliens. One of them is called, I don't know, Zardos. You've got this classic 2 guys, 1 woman, and the woman is all emotional and poetic and everything. And the other 2 guys are far more practical and realistic. Zolgus. Zolgus is apparently the captain of the ship. Zia is the girl who can be all girly and poetic about things. And there's some other guy who's likewise uninteresting. They land on Earth in the center of the Earth because they think the city is going to be there. It isn't the center of the Earth. Horace was American, so it's next to Mount Rushmore. And they examine the carved heads on Mount Rushmore. And he does this quaint thing where it's like, oh, these species used one opening mouth for both speaking and for stuffing food into. How gross. Wouldn't it work better, Horace, if you'd actually told us what these aliens were like in the first place? At page 56, I've got no idea what these aliens are, because he never had any idea for aliens or any idea for their galactic culture. He was just going, oh, they're aliens, so they can criticize humanity. It's really, really frickin' annoying. At one point they go, maybe they could fly like we can. And that's it. Having said that, they then go to Washington, which hasn't been destroyed in the nuclear holocaust that has apparently destroyed the whole Earth. Though later he remembers himself and goes, oh, there were a couple of strikes in the area. And they see all these statues, but they see some statues with wings, and they instantly know they're allegorical figures, but not real figures. They've already been hypothesizing about humans flying. Nothing in this book makes any kind of consistent sense, except as satire of humanity. Now, I like a good satire as much as the next person, and probably more than some people, but it has to be good. And in order for satire to be good, you have to have a core characteristic that has some semblance of logic, and this book really doesn't. So having landed in Mount Rushmore and not found the center of civilization they expected, they go straight to New York, of course, because what American science fiction novel from the 50s isn't going to go straight to New York, right? Having got to New York, everything has been destroyed. Everything! All the cellulose paper. So no books, no reading, no information at all, except what they get off plaques attached to the mostly ruined buildings that they have to archaeologically excavate. Now I ask you, American or European, how would it go if you went to an abandoned city when the only way you had to know anything about that culture was through plaques on buildings? And only stone plaques and iron plaques, because the bronze ones apparently melted. How well do you think you would know that culture? Would you know it well enough to decide that the clothes they wore were ridiculous, especially for women, and the shoes they wore were so terrible that they must have been semi-crippled and maybe they didn't even walk at all? Don't answer that. I already know the answer. Inscriptions on the public buildings indicated that the inhabitants of the city had great reverence for such abstractions as democracy and liberty. Well, how do you even know what democracy is, let alone liberty? You strange being with at least 2 mouth openings who can fly, though we don't know how. Who is incidentally also telepathic, and these transcriptions are only approximations of what they thought at each other. So having waffled around in America for a while and criticized everything from the socio-political system, which they suddenly know in depth and fully, having read the plaques on the buildings of Washington and New York, they then scatter to the 4 winds. We get, where does Zia go? I think she goes to South America, where she gives us a detailed, in-depth discussion of what Mexico was like and how spiritual the Incas were and how they worshipped death and all this other stuff. Meanwhile, Zorbog, or whatever his name is, goes to Europe and he starts with Britain, and the extrapolations of the British it's satire. Horace is satirizing everything about every place he goes. And he could probably have done a decent satire book, because the things he laughs at are the commonalities. It's like, oh, Great Britain has got such horrible weather. Well, how do you even know that? Unnamed alien from a planet which apparently has 24 hours a day sunlight. How do you know Britain has terrible weather? How can you hypothesize that all the Rule Britannica empire builders, and how does he even know the word imperialism? How does you know that they were rugged because of the appalling temperature? Maybe it was ideal for this species that you've never seen, that you've had to reconstruct from skeletal remains that are over 40,000 years old, with no images except the marble busts left over. It's just appallingly bad, really. The satire part is okay. It could be okay, but not in this format. You'd have to have a realistic civilization or alien. You'd have to have a realistic reason to be satirizing all this, and you'd have to have some kind of moderate explanation for how our aliens from the other side of the galaxy actually know even a third of what they're talking about. So Zolgos goes on for quite a while about the British monarchy, and yeah, Britain tells you a lot about its monarchy from carvings and graves and stuff, but at the same time he's telling us that the British Isles were completely and utterly devastated by this hydrogen explosion war, and he shouldn't know anywhere near as much as he does. He shouldn't be able to hypothesize that they ruled the world because of the oceanic powers. He shouldn't be able to go to the remnants of the British Museum and say that the imperial culture raided all the other cultures of the world. Yeah, sure. British Museum's got a lot of stuff from India and a lot of stuff from Egypt and a lot of stuff from all over the world, and some of it's pretty dodgy. But our alien Zolgabagag, or whatever his name is, hasn't been to India, and none of the others have either. He hasn't been to Egypt. He shouldn't even know the name. There's no way that he should be able to know that these relics come from those countries, because he doesn't know those countries exist. So then he goes across the continent to France and starts getting all maudlin about how romantic and sensuous the countryside is. And it's like, I'm done. I cannot cope with this anymore. I bought this in the expectation of reading science fiction. For science fiction to exist, you've got to have A, science, B, fiction. It can't be 70% satire with no matrix to fit the satire into. I'm not actually arguing with any of Horace's observations about how futile the agricultural system is. I'm just saying you need to present it in a better way. Seriously, Horace should have stuck to speak better, write better English, because his writing isn't bad, or hobbies for pleasure and profit, because as naff as that sounds, it's nowhere near as naff as 43,000 years later, as presented to you by aliens who are never described, from a culture that hasn't been even named, for purposes that are outrageously unlikely. Terrible, absolutely terrible. Mostly with a book like this, I can say, well, I can see what they were trying to do, and they could have done it better, but no, this is appalling. Who is it for? People who don't enjoy the same things I do, clearly. This might be useful for someone who's doing a PhD on 50s science fiction that's trying to satirize the world. It might be good for someone who's doing a master's on 50s American satire. Who would I recommend it to? No one. No one. I do not think anyone should read this book. If you by some accident have read it and enjoy it, by all means tell me why. But confess that you enjoyed it, not because it was a good book. It's a terrible book. The only people I would like to see read this are the Elusive Exclusives Book Club, because they could rip this one into shreds, and I want to laugh while they're doing that. Other than that, if you find it, even for 50p, my recommendation is don't bother. Thank you for watching this small mini rant. If you believe that I am wrong and that Horace was a great writer and this is truly good science fiction, I can't wait to hear your explanation for that. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Thank you for clicking that thumbs up if you did. Read good books, and my recommendation would be not this good book. I am going over to my to-read bookshelf and trying to find something that is a shoe-in, because I need something good after this to wash the taste of really stupid, useless writing out of my mouth. Bye-bye.